Hello and welcome to Analysis with me, Jonathan Steele. Despite threats by the Taliban to disrupt the presidential elections, Saturday's turnout has been heralded as a success which bodes well for the future of Afghanistan. With help from both local and international observers, the process displayed greater compliance with internationally recognized principles of democracy in contrast to the elections of 2009. The turnout of approximately 7 million Afghans is said to reflect a newfound faith in politics. Yet it will take another 6 weeks before the results are announced. And until then, it remains difficult to predict who out of the three front-runners vying to replace Hamid Karzai will actually win. Though the electoral process was not marred by Taliban attacks, as some commentators predicted, at least the election day, peace remains tenuous ahead of the security transition by the end of 2014. And regardless of the mood of cautious optimism, Afghanistan continues to face major challenges and setbacks. So who will be the successor to former President Hamid Karzai? And can he bring together the various ethnic groups to agree upon the laws and rules by which they will govern their society? Joining me in the studio to discuss these matters are Dr. Mohammed Hotak, President of the British Afghan Chamber of Commerce and Industry, William Reeve, a former foreign correspondent, editor and journalist at the BBC World Service. From Kabul by Skype, we're joined by Kate Clark, Country Director for the Afghan Analyst Network, one of the most respected Kabul-based independent research groups, and Paul Schulte from King's College, University of London. But now let's first begin with a look at this VT report.
After months of campaigning and terrorist threats, the Afghan electorate had given their verdict in the first round of the Afghan presidential election. The result of the ballot isn't expected for a couple of weeks, due to the length of time it takes to transport ballot boxes across rural areas. Most observers believe that the election will then go into a runoff between former Foreign Minister Dr. Abdullah Abdullah and Dr. Ashraf Ghani, former Minister of Finance. The two former ministers are both looking to replace President Hamid Karzai, who has been president since NATO ejected the Taliban in 2001. The election turnout was estimated to be around 58%, almost twice as high as the 2009 poll. After the election, the mood on the streets in Kabul was one of general relief.
We are so happy that yesterday's election took place in a peaceful environment. There was good security around the country and everywhere was peaceful.
The poll was also marked by a strong turnout from Afghan women. These women in Herats, a key battleground for women's rights in Afghanistan over the last decade, queuing up to cast their ballot. They said they were not afraid of the threats issued by the Taliban.
As an Afghan woman, I have come here to cast my vote in order to choose my future. I'm not scared of any threat. I ask all Afghan women to come and vote.
The election campaign has been marked by a series of attacks by the Taliban on the Interior Ministry and on the Afghan Election Commission. However, a largely peaceful election raises questions about the Taliban's strength as an organisation. Following the polls closing, Western leaders and diplomats were quick to declare the election a success.
Despite problems, despite challenges, despite threats and intimidation, you decided in good numbers, according to the preliminary reports, to come and vote for your future.
This will be a historic moment if we get this right, this democratic transition. We want to see everybody participating, including, I would say, all the women of Afghanistan, and we welcome what's been done to try and prepare for these elections.
However, concerns have been raised about the possibility of electoral fraud, which has marred previous election campaigns. In 2009, Dr. Abdullah, then running against the incumbent Hamid Karzai, pulled out of the runoff vote in protest over the conduct of the election, where it has been estimated that 1 million votes were declared void. There is also concern about voting along ethnic lines, with Dr. Abdullah as the minority Tajik candidate, against the candidate from the larger Pashtun community of Karzai, and his main challenger in this election, Dr. Ghani. In this election, Dr. Abdullah is considered to be the frontrunner, and his likely challenger, Dr. Ghani, has stated that the election should run into a second round if no one wins an absolute majority of the vote. If this is the case, Afghanistan may still have to decide who it wants to replace Karzai in the coming month. Nathaniel Amos Sansom, Islam Channel.
Well, Kate Clark, let me come to you first of all. You're in Kabul. Why is it taking so long to count the votes? I mean, is it just a matter of geography?
It is geography, but that's not the entire problem. You have to imagine a system where there are a lot of complaints of fraud, and some are genuine and some are frivolous. They all have to be looked at and assessed. And you also have votes, or indeed whole boxes, whole polling stations, where the vote was rigged, and they all have to be sifted through, they have to be adjudicated. And finally, we get some sort of answer about who Afghans voted for on Saturday.
But doesn't the delay actually raise suspicions? Wouldn't it be better to announce partial results in those parts of the country where, you know, large numbers voted, like in Kabul, for example, or some of the other cities?
We will get partial results. When there's 5% of the vote counted, the Independent Electoral Commission will release preliminary results, but they are likely to be they're not representative of the country. It's probably a bit like Britain, where in the general elections it always looks like Labour's coming in first because it's the votes of the urban areas that get counted first, and then the rural Tory votes come in later, and they normally shift either completely or somewhat towards the Conservatives. And it's a bit like that, only of course a lot more complicated, because Afghanistan is a lot more complicated country.
And what can you say about the turnout? I mean, it seems to be bigger than the 38% of 2009, but I believe in 2004 it was something like 83%. So where do you place the turnout this time round, and how would you evaluate the figures?
It was higher. It was higher than expected. And it's not everywhere. There are places where the Taliban managed to intimidate people into staying at home, or where even the polling centres just couldn't open. So it wasn't everywhere that people managed to get out to a vote, but where they could, where the security was good enough, they came out in large numbers. And I think that's largely because this was a genuine competition. We still don't have a front runner. We've got 3 very strong candidates. And curiously, they seem to be polling well across the country. So even though, for example, the ethnic factor is an issue, for example, in Kandahar, which is almost completely Pashtun, we had a lot of people voting for Dr. Abdullah, who's seen as Tajik, and for Dr. Ashraf Ghani, who is from, if you like, a different sort of Pashtun. He's from a different tribal lineage. So it was an interesting election. It was a genuine competition. And I think that's, as in any country, that brought people out.
Well, Mohammed Hotak, I mean, would you say that is really important, that people weren't voting on ethnic lines as far as one can tell?
Exactly. I think we knew this for a long time, that Afghanistan is in a new era where people have gone beyond the ethnic lines. But internationally, to get that point across to the world was a different matter. I personally had no doubt that what Kate said was going to happen. This time the election was about who is the most qualified to take Afghanistan into a new future, rather than who belonged to what tribe or which region of Afghanistan or what language they spoke. So I'm very glad that Kate said what she said, and I strongly agree with her. And I think that's what the future is for Afghanistan, where people will be judged on the content of their character rather than on the region they come from or the ethnic line they have, or any major tribe they come from. So it's good news for me as an British Afghan, and it's good news for Afghanistan. So I'm very glad.
But nevertheless, William Reeve, every candidate was very careful in the choice of his vice presidential running mate to make sure it was from a different ethnic group, so that they would cross the borders. So ethnicity was thought about, wasn't it?
Yes, I was just thinking that when I was listening to Mohammed, and that's an extremely good point, because most of the presidential candidates have been very careful how they've chosen their first vice president candidate and their other second vice president candidate as well. And they'll certainly pick up votes across ethnic lines through that as well. In Ashraf Ghani's case, quite a few Uzbek votes.
But not Tajik. I mean, he's got no Tajik on his side, has he?
No, and the Tajik candidate has got a Hazara as a deputy, so they're certainly... ethnicities are being balanced, but it's not that people have suddenly become blind to them. But there are, I think, now only one factor rather than the main factor.
Kate, let me come back to you. I did read one of your colleagues on your wonderful Afghanistan Analyst Network website saying that in 30% of the polling stations there were no observers, either Afghan or international. I mean, is that really quite a damagingly high figure, in the sense that if there are complaints, how will you deal with it if there were no observers, independent observers?
Yeah, I mean, as always, there's going to be a correlation between insecure remote areas and attempts at vote rigging, partly because those are the places where many people may not come out to vote, and those in control of the area may be able to then try and stuff the ballots, but also because it's very difficult for observers to get out. And we see a clustering of independent observers in the cities. However, it's not always that simple to rig an election. And last time, what we saw some. It's very difficult to do the maths properly, let alone people using the same pen on every single ballot paper in a particular polling station. But having round figures for the different candidates, it's very difficult for human beings to actually defraud in that sort of mass way, and a forensic audit will pick up the ballot stations, the polling stations that have been tampered with. So it's not a lost cause, even if there aren't observers.
And of course, I believe every polling station has to pin up on the outside the results for its polling area before they send it all to Kabul. So if the local people see the figures there and suddenly it all changes, they've got some basis to complain, haven't they?
Exactly, yeah.
What do you think of the Election Complaints Commission? I mean, last time there were international people on these commissions, the Independent Election Commission and the Complaints Commission. This time, I mean, Karzai changed the law to knock out all the foreigners. I mean, is that really important or not?
Well, again, the fact that it was an open race makes it more difficult for election officials to actually find the winning candidate to side with. And we've seen in the last elections that even the IEC officials in local areas were either there for candidates to persuade to support them or to buy. And at the centre, there was a lot of worry about the appointments to those two commissions, which largely came from the presidential palace. And for example, the vetting early on of who could stand in the election was done behind doors, and no one was told about why people had been rejected from the list of candidates. I would say, though, that in the last few months, I think both the commissions are looking braver and more neutral, and it really is up to them now to show some backbone and really trust in the Afghan people to actually look at things fairly and try and get the best possible result. I think for them, they will do well politically the more neutral and impartial they behave at the moment.
Well, Mohammed, there's also very important how the various candidates react. I mean, if one of them starts screaming fraud and so on, or two of them do, it could be quite damaging. Do you think they're going to be, to recognise the result and not sort of artificially claim fraud just because they're not doing as well as they hoped?
Yeah, of the three main candidates, I think Zalmay Rasool has been very clear about everything. And he has said that regardless of what the result is, he will happily accept the results. On the other hand, there is Ashraf Ghani and Dr. Abdullah. Some of the data that has been provided by their observers, obviously the Abdullah team says that he is ahead, and Ashraf Ghani's team says that he is ahead of in the polls that they have counted, or the data that they have. But what the Election Commission has been saying is that this kind of forecasting of who's in the lead or who's winning should not be done, because they feel like it would not be good in the long term, or it wouldn't be in the interest of the Afghan nation, and it could probably pave the way for some sort of instability. So I would agree with Afghanistan's Independent Election Commission that everything should be left to the Election Commission, and when the actual results are out and they have been counted, and whatever they announce, I think the candidates should be dignified enough to agree with it, unless there are cases of abuse or fraud, which will be taken care of by the Complaint Commission that they've got in place. So I hope they avoid that.
And Paul Schulte, I mean, what's your sort of impression of the way the candidates are behaving now since the actual voting happened?
Well, I think it's too early to be sure, because it depends on their reaction to things which are happening or have happened but we don't know about yet. And there will be reports reaching them from their supporters in various areas about the degree of fairness that they've seen. At the moment, I think all one can say is it's encouraging, but it could go wrong if there creeps in a note of shrill protest that we're being robbed, as Abdullah felt last time.
Well, it certainly seems that Karzai's favoured candidate is not going to win. Do you think could create a crisis? Do you think Hamid Karzai could somehow try and reverse that in any way, or is it just too late now?
I think it's too late. He's not left himself enough leverage to increase the power and attractiveness of his favoured candidate. So then I guess the critical things come in the composition of governments and the assignment of ministries after whoever becomes president is appointed.
And William, what's your feeling? Do you think Hamid Karzai is going to accept the result? Has he got any alternative?
Well, he said that he wants to move on. He doesn't want to be. He'll be sort of happy, in so many words, when he hands over the mantle of the presidency, but lives next door to the presidential palace to keep a very close eye on what is happening.
He's going to be inside the Ark, is he? Or?
I'm not exactly sure where the new building is, but I mean it's
within the security
next door or within. I'm
well.
sure there'll be a door into the presidential compound.
You can't just walk
happens.
along the public street and knock on the door.
I think it's going to be extremely well. It is extremely close. I mean, he'll be sort of cheek and jowl with the new president, I think.
Well, maybe, Kate, since you're in Kabul, you could answer the point we've just been discussing. I mean, how close, I mean, not just geographically, but politically, is Karzai going to be to whoever is chosen, do you think?
Well, he will be able to walk and have morning cups of tea with the new president within the grounds of the presidential palace. Politically, it's going to be difficult for him, I think. Everyone assumed that Zalmay Rasool was his favoured candidate. He didn't come out and say it openly, but it was very clear that was the case. But unfortunately, it looks like Zalmay Rasool has actually had quite a weak campaign. Of course, it's very early to say, and we don't even have preliminary results, but it looks like Ashraf Ghani and Dr. Abdullah are the two front runners. And it will probably be less easy for Hamid Karzai to be a presence in the background if either of those two men become the next president. So I think, I mean, it's always very, very tricky predicting anything here when we're in very early days yet. But I would suggest from what we see at the moment that Hamid Karzai will have less influence than he would have hoped for, and that many people predicted, say this time last year or even 3-6 months ago.
But I mean, it's obviously terribly important. Let's assume that Zalmay Rasool is the third person that drops out and there's a runoff, who Zalmay Rasool endorses for the final round, and that's where Hamid Karzai's influence might come in. Do you think, which of the two, if those are the front runners, Ashraf Ghani and Abdullah, which one will Zalmay Rasool endorse?
Well, both Dr. Ashraf Ghani and Dr. Abdullah have been very, very keen to say very nice things about Hamid Karzai in public. So he could, with a good face, bring his support, bring Zalmay Rasool behind either of them, I think. I would just caution in assuming that everyone who voted for Zalmay Rasool will vote for whoever Rasool would endorse in any second round, because that doesn't seem to be the case so far. That some of the people who dropped out, their supporters did not necessarily follow the person that they endorsed. It's not necessarily the case. So even though Hamid Karzai is a brilliant wheeler and dealer, I think he does believe that he can influence things even at this late stage. If it goes to a second round, it will again be up to the Afghan electorate. And I think they have shown that they can, by actually genuinely voting, ease out the room for fraud and ease out the room for this sort of wheeling and dealing, backroom deals. I think Ashraf Ghani today said they should have the chance for second round if that's the case. There shouldn't be the sort of deal making of the sort that has been so evident in the Hamid Karzai presidency.
And Mohammed, do you have a view on who you think might be endorsed by Zalmay Rasool? Which of the two?
I think I actually agree with Kate. I think it's a very difficult question to answer at this stage because at the moment it seems like there are two frontrunners, and both of the frontrunners have in their campaign not shown any kind of inclination of joining the President Karzai government, because sometimes they've been very critical of the government. And then specifically in some of the debates, they've been critical of Zalmay Rasool actually being part of the government and being a representative of Karzai in a way. So I don't think I can actually say anything at this stage to say who Zalmay Rasool would go with. But as Kate also said, I think it was a very important point that, even if there is a second runoff, then whether all the people who were with Zalmay Rasool would actually go with whoever Zalmay Rasool goes with. So I think it would be something for us to wait and watch. And I would personally like a second round if there is no clear winner, because as Ashraf Ghani said that he would rather have the people's mandate than actually go in, behind the curtain and do some sort of deals which would actually lose the confidence of the people in their government once again. And I'm sure that I don't think Dr. Abdullah would want to do that, and Ashraf Ghani has made his point clear already. So.
Well, on that point, I think we have to end the first section of the programme, and thank you very much, Kate Clark, for being with us. I gather you won't be able to stay for the second half, but please do remain with us, viewers, because we're going to be talking about Hamid Karzai's legacy. What has he achieved in the 12 years he's had in power, and what faces Afghanistan in the future in terms of the economy, security, and, of course, women's rights? Stay with us.